Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming to the Cambridge Union for our Week 1 debate, the very first in a series of 9 debates which we are hosting every Thursday. This week, we turn our attention to driverless cars, the exact motion being this House fears the mass adoption of driverless cars, something hopefully you'll all agree is very interesting and has aspects of ethics, philosophy, science, engineering, economics, human factors, law, and many more different types and aspects of the debate that we can consider. A little bit of housekeeping on how the debate works. If you haven't been before, each speaker gets 8 to 10 minutes to deliver a speech, and in that speech you can take part in the debate yourself by standing up and saying point of information to ask a question to one of the speakers, which they can either accept or decline. It's up to them to do that because it cuts into their time. Equally, between some of the rounds of speakers, we'll be having floor speeches. This is where you'll get the opportunity to stand up and give your own opinion on the matter. We'll have a speech in opposition, proposition, and abstention, and we'll go around like that. If you could wait for a microphone, and if you just put your hand up when I ask for speeches, then I will choose you. If you could please say your name and your college so that Tom can write it down. And also, because the best floor speech of term wins a free bike. That's great for everyone. But anyway, without further ado, I think it's time to begin our debate. Our first speaker for the proposition is Nick Freeman. Nick Freeman, also known as Mr. Loophole, is a celebrity defense lawyer specializing in traffic and speeding offenses for high-profile clients. Nick, the floor is yours.
Good evening, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to be invited to speak at Britain's second best university. I've never been invited to speak at Oxford, Britain's third best university. The best, of course, is my alma mater, Trent Poly, which is now known as Nottingham Trent University. In World War II, the average life expectancy of a bomber pilot was just 2 weeks, and during the war, over 57,000 were killed, about 46% of the total of Bomber Command. Nowadays, these terrible casualties don't happen because in modern warfare, bombs are dropped by pilotless drones with machines and computers responsible for locating their targets and dropping bombs on them. Barack Obama called them targeted killings. So are things any better now? Is war any less horrific? Well, in 2006, the drones targeted Ayman Zawahiri, an al-Qaeda leader. The bombs missed him, but killed 76 innocent children and 29 adults. And in 2010, they made 4 unsuccessful bombing attacks on Qari Hussain, a deputy commander of the Pakistani Taliban. They missed him on all 4 raids, but killed 128 innocent people. And so attempts to kill 41 men have resulted in the death of 1,147 people. So no doubt flush with the success of these targeted killings, those in the know are anxious to augment the pilotless drone with the driverless car. And those like me who stand in the way of such progress are called Luddites. There are approximately 1,700 deaths or serious injuries on the British roads every year, and about 94% of these are caused by human error. And the proponents of driverless cars point out that machines don't make human error, just like the pilotless drones that kill 1,147 people. The supporters of driverless cars point to a utopian world where there is no street furniture and no speed limit. You can sit drunkenly in the back of your car, high on drugs, whilst machines take care of everything, and sophisticated computer programs that make bat radar look positively prehistoric. And in a recent survey, 1/3 of the people said that they would use a driverless car on a night out when drinking alcohol, which is great news for the country's pubs, but not such good news for your livers, or indeed for the NHS. And so, if you're snoozing, boozing, or schmoozing, once the vehicle is operational, what use are you if you are suddenly required to take control? And what if they go wrong? What if they malfunction? What happens if they lose connectivity? What happens if the technology is hijacked by terrorists. Can you imagine the carnage caused by hundreds of cars hurtling down the motorway, colliding? Only 3 weeks ago, 2 Iraqi men, Andy Starr and Farhed Salah, appeared before Westminster Magistrates Court, accused of a plot to set off a remotely controlled bomb in a driverless car. Why am I so skeptical? Well, the first test of a driverless shuttle in Las Vegas, it lasted less than 10 minutes before it crashed into a van. Of course, it was the van driver's fault. He pulled out of a junction, assuming that the driverless shuttle would let him in. That's something drivers do every day, but there was no driver in the shuttle, so nobody was being let out. But to be fair, it was an accident caused by human error, which could be eradicated by just having driverless cars. No more human error, just driverless cars getting you to your destination in one piece. Just like Joshua Brown, the 40-year-old US Navy SEAL. He was traveling to work in his Tesla, allowing the car to use its driverless technology to convey him there whilst he caught up with some admin. It all went swimmingly until a lorry broke down in his lane. The accident-prone humans drove around the lorry, but tragically, Mr. Brown's autopilot did not, and he was killed instantly. It was nobody's fault. The lorry logically shouldn't have been there, just as the drunk shouldn't step out onto the road, just as a tire shouldn't burst at high speed, just as a child shouldn't run out from behind a driverless ice cream van. And how is a driverless car going to exercise the judgment of Solomon if confronted with either hitting a young child or driving into a raging river, killing you and your family? And many people have actually tested driverless cars, have expressed grave concerns about their safety. In November last year, Jeremy Clarkson warned that whilst as a passenger of an autonomous vehicle, the vehicle made not one, but 2 mistakes, both of which would have killed him over a 50-mile journey on the M4, had he not taken over the controls. And whose fault would it have been if the driverless car had killed Clarkson? Whose fault was it that Joshua Brown's car drove into the back of a lorry? Whose fault was it that the pilotless drones killed 1,147 people? The answer is simple. Nobody's. Just machine error. So can we really have a legal system relating to road traffic law that is literally devoid of criminality? No need to call the police. No need to breathalyze anybody. No need to arrest anyone and charge them with dangerous or careless driving. No need to call Mr. Loophole. Just call for a driverless ambulance, and if there's a fire, a driverless fire engine. Surely what we need is a legal system that accommodates certain eventualities. I'm not suggesting that all the safety mechanisms of driverless cars should be cast aside so that Sir Alex Ferguson could rely on the defense of a medical emergency to enable him to get to the bathroom on time. But there does need to be a degree of flexibility. What would happen if someone experienced a serious illness, such as a heart attack? What would happen if the occupants needed to escape from a critical situation, as was the case with David Beckham? Will there be an override, as there is with autopilot on planes? And if so, what's the point? Wouldn't it be better to spend these billions of pounds on a better public transport system? The UK automotive sector turns over about £77.5 billion per year and supports almost 1 million jobs. And literally all of this will be destined for the scrap heap when driverless cars take over our road. And where's it going to end? How safe is your job going to be from the rise of the robot? How long before you summon a car to take you to work, to be told upon arrival that your job can be done better by a robot? Up to half of all jobs in Britain are vulnerable. And a report from the Institute for Public Policy Research suggests that the new technology could wipe out jobs generating £290 billion per year. That's a third of the total of the UK. And furthermore, it will be mainly the lower-paid manual workers who are hit hardest. That doesn't matter, the driverless brigade will tell you. You can spend all your time sleeping in late, watching reality television, and playing golf. And is there really an appetite for this? Or is it something that's government-driven, like diesel cars were? In a recent survey, 60% of Mazda owners said that they wanted to drive. And no disrespect to Mazda owners, but can you imagine what the statistic would be if they asked Aston Martin owners? Christian Woolmer, a transport analyst, told The Times, and I quote, "There is no demand for driverless cars. They are not something we need or want. The whole concept that we will end up with shared electric pods that will take us anywhere ignores the day-to-day experience of most people." And now let's just consider the emotional aspect of driving. It's not just about getting from point A to point B. It's a mission to provide the essence of driving pleasure. The excitement of taking your first driving lesson. The sheer euphoria of passing your driving test, which gives you a rite of passage. The pleasure of setting off to a destination afar with you as captain of your own ship. It's an intimate experience, almost akin to the relationship that we used to have with our stallions in years gone by. Can you just imagine for one moment robotizing this debate in this wonderful atmospheric chamber? We try and use our skills to persuade you, but just think how much better informed you'd be if robots were proposing and opposing the motion. But it wouldn't work, because if you exercise the human element, it becomes sterile, it becomes impotent, and it completely misses the point. We need to remain the authors of our own destiny, and we need to remain the drivers of our own cars. And any proposals to the contrary which are put forward by our driverless government should be banned from the roads. Don't turn the steering wheel into a white elephant. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nick. Our first speaker for the opposition is Jamie Arbib. Jamie is a London-based investor in technology and the founder of Tellus Mater, an independent philanthropic foundation dedicated to exploring the impacts of disruptive technology. Jamie, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. So I think it's time to inject a little optimism into this debate. There's a disruption happening in transportation at the moment as electric vehicles gradually replace gasoline cars. But it's a painfully slow disruption. The societal benefits that come from lower cost, lower carbon emissions and cleaner air are going to arrive too late and be too small to make much difference to our world. It's a model that we call disruption from above. Electric vehicles start off very expensive, and over time they come down in cost. And soon enough, sometime in the mid-2020s, they cross over and get cheaper than gasoline vehicles. And all through that time, more and more people buy electric vehicles as they become more competitive. But it's a model in which very little changes. Other than the energy source, pretty much everything else stays the same. You still own your car. You still have to drive it. You still have to park it. You still have to maintain it. You still have to fuel it. The costs of ownership remain with you. You're doing just 10,000 miles a year in your car. It's sitting idle 95% of the time. We still have just as many cars in the vehicle fleet. We still need all the parking spaces. We still need all the roadways that we currently have. And even by the 2040s, and the most optimistic estimates, electric vehicles make up only about half of new vehicle sales. So to replace the whole fleet of combustion engines is going to take another few decades. But once you add vehicle autonomy and ride-hailing to electric vehicles, you get a whole new form of transportation that's radically more disruptive and is going to transform transportation very, very fast. That form of transportation is called Transport as a Service, or TaaS for short. It's essentially a robo-taxi. The idea that we no longer own our cars, we just hail one when we need them. They turn up, they drop you off, and they go off and pick someone else up. Those cars, instead of doing 10,000 miles a year, might do 100,000 miles a year. They're in use all the time. Everything changes in that model, and most importantly, the price plummets. And that's going to lead to a very quick adoption of these vehicles. It's a disruption that's driven by the economics. And to understand why this gets so cheap, I need to just give you a little bit of background on how the economics work. So we need to start by understanding vehicle degradation. So there are about 20 moving parts in the powertrain of an electric vehicle. In the powertrain of a combustion engine, there are hundreds, if not thousands of parts. They're hugely complex and well-engineered enterprises. And with many touching parts and much friction and heat and vibration, gasoline vehicles degrade very quickly. But in an electric vehicle, you have very few touching parts, and there's very little vehicle degradation. And what that means is that you get very, very low maintenance costs. They just don't break down. Yes?
Would you not say that one of the big factors with electric cars is the degradation of their batteries?
I'll come to that in a moment. But no, the answer is that the data we have, and we've done an awful lot of research with high utilization users, so electric trucks, electric buses, electric taxi companies, suggests that batteries are lasting far longer than we ever anticipated in the field. And when you go to a fleet like this, you can play with your chemistries much more. You don't need kind of insane acceleration that you get in a Tesla. You can prioritize battery cycle life, which allows much longer lifetime. So you get the second benefit of having low vehicle degradation is you get much longer lifetimes. Okay, so we think that electric vehicles produced today are already lasting 500,000 miles. And that's before the incentives in the market change to actually prioritize vehicle lifetime. And at that point, we're going to get vehicles, we think, lasting at least 1 million miles. Now, of course, if you own your vehicle yourself, having a 1 million-mile car is utterly useless to you. You do 10,000 miles a year, it's going to last 100 years. It's going to be obsolete or corroded well before then. You get no benefit from that lifetime. But as soon as you go to a fleet ownership model, everything changes. Okay, you're doing 100,000 miles a year. And so that lifetime becomes hugely important. So as a fleet owner, what you're going to do is you're going to take the purchase cost of that vehicle and you're going to spread it over the vehicle lifetime. So each mile that the vehicle covers costs just 1/1,000,000th of the cost of the vehicle. So lifetime becomes far more important than the purchase cost of electric vehicles, which is the way everyone compares them now. So the depreciation cost of a self-driving electric vehicle in a fleet is far lower. And when you add to that the huge saving from maintenance because they don't break down, the saving from gasoline because an electric vehicle is far more efficient, the savings from insurance costs because they're far safer, you get a form of transportation that's going to be at least, well, less than a quarter the cost of buying your own new vehicle. And on top of that, it'll be under half the cost of just the operating cost of a gasoline car. So that's to say, even if cars are free, even if we give you a gasoline vehicle, to operate it, it's still going to cost twice as much as taking a transport as a service vehicle. Now, those economics, given that most people are very price-driven, very cost-conscious, is going to drive a very fast adoption. The analysis we've done is of the US market. The average saving that a US family is going to make is going to be about $6,000 a year. And yes, the elites and so on might resist and like to drive their own car, but that kind of scale of increase, that kind of saving, disposable income saving, is going to make an enormous difference, and people are going to adopt these very fast. And we think once adoption gets going, you get these vicious circles and feedback loops that kick in that drive it ever faster. I mean, adoption of new technology always moves in an S-curve. Starts slowly, goes exponential. And we think within 10 years of these fleets being on the road, largely the US transport fleet will have moved over to transport as a service. And just to anchor your thinking, it took only 20 years for the horse essentially to become obsolete as a form of transport over 100 years ago. And we think it's going to be an even quicker disruption this time around. And if we're right, and that's the case, and we get this very fast disruption, the benefits to the society are enormous. To start with, you need far less cars on the road. Each car does the work of 10. So you're going to have a fraction of the number of cars needed in the fleet. The oil use is going to plummet. The economic benefits are going to be enormous. That $6,000 per US family by 2030 is going to equate to about $1 trillion boost to the US economy per year. Add to that the time freed up from driving, about 150 billion hours a year. that can be put to productive uses, that's going to equate to at least another $1 trillion to the US economy. Huge gains. Yes, they're going to be.
So beyond all of these profit incentive-driven motives, Nick told you about genuine moral and ethical debates with these cars, right? He told you about what would this car choose between hitting the pedestrian and ramming into a barricade and thus maybe killing its own passenger. How would you program that car?
It's not for me to program it. These are all challenges we need to overcome. I'm not saying we ignore the challenges. If we get fixated on the problems, we're never going to make progress. We need to be mindful of them. We need to solve them. But we can't let them slow down. The benefits are too big. You've got these huge economic benefits to the people in society who need it most, the people in society who haven't had a pay rise for many, many years. But beyond that, you've got environmental benefits. You're going to have a very, very fast decarbonization of the transportation system. You've got huge social benefits. As people are excluded from transport because they're on low incomes or because they have disabilities or they're elderly, can't access transport, suddenly get time to access economic opportunity and social participation. You're going to get huge benefits to cities as they become far more livable. The air cleans up. We get far less accidents. I mean, the benefits across society are enormous. But to realize it's just one, I've got 1 minute left, I'm afraid. But to realize those benefits, we need autonomous vehicles, and we need to put fear aside, and we need to embrace the future. Now, you've got plenty to fear if you're a country or a company that doesn't embrace the future. If you're an oil company, a car manufacturer, an insurance company, a car dealer, or if you work in those industries, or you drive for a living, we can't ignore those threats. We can't ignore those problems. But we must go into this with our eyes wide open. We can mitigate and we can plan for them if we see them coming. We must harness that fear and use it to drive the creativity that we need to solve those problems. And we need to use the hope and optimism to show us a path there. With proper analysis and foresight, this House has nothing to fear from the introduction of AVs and plenty to gain. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jamie. We'll now go to our first round of floor speeches. So please put your hand up if you'd like to speak. We'll start with anybody who'd like to speak in proposition of the motion. Yes, just over there. Thank you.
In rebuttal to
Sorry, could you say your name and for the
yeah, Haniel Bay, Trinity College.
Thank you.
In rebuttal to the first opposition speech, I'd just like to contrast how driverless cars would affect urban areas versus rural areas. So I can understand the economic argument in a city to an extent, although one could also make the argument that actually in urban areas what would make sense is, as Mr. Freeman said, to invest in public transport. However, in rural areas, is it economically viable to introduce lots of these sort of driverless Uber equivalents when, so for example, in my area is one of the least densely populated areas in the country. It simply doesn't make sense in terms of profitability to put lots of driverless cars there. And if you're saying, right, okay, that does make more sense in urban areas, then why not just invest in a public transport system that benefits people, has even lower environmental costs, reduces traffic, plus the fact that it's not much fun to be in a car in the centre of London anyway, not regarding the fact that in rural areas you might actually enjoy driving, as was mentioned. So maybe
you can reply, yes.
You know, I think in terms of public transport, we see a sort of merger between transport as a service and public transport. You'll have, you know, pods, and you'll have 4-seaters and 8-seaters and 20-seaters and so on. It's going to be the lowest form. It's going to be the lowest cost form of transport, and we see them kind of working together. Undoubtedly, it's more expensive in the rural areas. You have more redundant legs, and so you're paying a sort of an extra cost. But you know, the economics still work. I mean, I think, you know, only the most rural areas are going to have to pay a premium for transport above driving their own vehicle. But as you get further out, if you've got you know 30-40% vehicle redundancy, which is a lot in this sort of fleet in a relatively rural area, it's still going to be cheaper than driving your own car. And don't forget, you know, 80% of the US, which is where we've done our analysis, is defined as urban. And so you know, we think absolutely it will work. But sorry, I should have said that those two forms of transport essentially come together, public and transport as a service. And the figures I'm giving you are before you account for any income. Right, so these fleets can produce, we think, huge amounts of income. The sort of Google model, we might go in city centers to a sort of, what we term a Googleization of the economy, where you might give away the product for free in return for the rights to monetize your user base, essentially.
Thank you. Would anybody like to make a speech in opposition of the motion? Yes, just there.
Thank you. James Kemmel, Downing College. I think the point that was just made is a very, very important one, particularly about the rural inclusivity. And my sense is that we should be very, very excited about driverless cars. Now, for some people, fear and excitement can be the same things, and there are some clubs that specialize in all of that. Wonderful stuff. But we're talking about introducing 100 million, 1 billion, 10 billion new pieces of technology. What that does to the economies of batteries, what that does to the economies of rural infrastructure, what that does to the case to build out robust 5G networks in rural places where there's very light footfall at the moment, that's a game changer. We should be very, very excited about the impact of 1 billion, 10 billion new driverless cars, what that's going to mean for new technology, for the unincluded, and for the economy and the society in a wider sense. I think we should be excited.
Thank you. Thanks. Finally, would anybody like to speak in abstention of this motion? Anybody? Yes, sorry, didn't see you.
Hello, Slava, Downing College. I would switch the topic from black to white to some kind of intermediate state, because is there satisfaction in driving a car? Of course there is, like to feel the acceleration, to feel the torque of the engine, that's great. But do you feel happy when you move 1 meter per minute in a traffic jam? You start and stop, it's kind of boring. And if that kind of job will be done by autonomous vehicle, and then it call you like, man, we are moving to the lights, and then you can have a satisfaction again, you can have this pleasure again, why not? Or if the car is parking itself on the slot where there is no space for driver to go away from the car, that's perfect, let it go. Or if you go to the restaurant in the city center, and then you need your car to park somewhere a few kilometers away, let it go. So the technology is not moving that fast that we are aware of driverless car hitting anybody on the street right tomorrow. But for the next 10 or 15 years, let the technology grow, and we will see a lot of advantages of the routine which we are not really happy of. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will do one more round of floor speeches after the third set of speakers, so we'll move on quickly. Our second speaker in proposition this evening is Professor Natasha Marat. She is the Research Group Leader for Human Factors and Safety at the Institute for Transport Studies at the University of Leeds, specializing in the human factors of highly automated driving. Natasha, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you for the invitation, this exciting event. This venue is amazing. I'm very excited to be here. This morning I was thinking about tonight and what I'm going to say, as you do, and I got a bit scared because I remembered two things. First of all, that I went to a university debating society when I joined Leeds University 27 years ago. And it made me think, oh my God, I've actually been at university longer than, more than half of my life. And that, if you want to work out how old I am, that's for the mathematicians, but try and concentrate now what I'm going to talk about. So the topic of the debate, I just want to make a few clarifications before I start. Technically speaking, I want to just make everyone understand where I am in terms of the 3 or technically 5 words: fear, mass adoption as another word, and driverless cars as another one. So I want to start off with driverless cars because I want us to understand, all of us, what we mean by driverless cars. Or are we talking about self-driving cars? Or are we talking about autonomous cars? Or are we talking about automated cars? And I think that's really important before we can go on and decide whether what they do and what they cannot do. So we'll start off a bit boring. Sorry, I'm an academic, so I'm going to be a bit technical and just give you some ideas of how we think about it. So the Society for Automotive Engineers has decided there are 5 levels of automation, with level 0 being the car that we drive these days manually, most of us. We're in control. We can make it go from one lane to the other mostly. And then it goes all the way up to level 5, where it goes everywhere, all the time, no matter what the weather, etc. And that, some say, is about 5 years away, and some say it's about 50 years away. And don't ask me what I think, but because that's not my job. So at the moment, we are around level 2, 3, according to the SAE levels, where the high-level cars that some of the people in this room probably drive have what SAE calls partial automation. So there is the car, basically, you can set it at a particular speed, and it will go at that speed for you, and it will stick in the lane with sort of lane-keeping system. And if there's a car in front of you that it brakes, it will slow down and not hit that car, or it will warn you and say, I'm about to hit that car, or something along those lines. Then we go up to a level 3, which actually some manufacturers are saying they have introduced. So General Motors in America is now talking about level 3, and they call that conditional automation, not partial, conditional. Get which one that is. So here, compared to level 2, where the manufacturer wants you to monitor the driving system at all times just in case, level 3, you don't need to monitor anymore, but you have to be able to respond to a notice to intervene. So you can look around a little bit more, but you still have to be prepared to intervene. Intervene in what and in which situation? Not known. And then you go up to level 4, where actually it drives itself around, but not everywhere, so depending on the road type. And then you've got level 5, which is everywhere, all the time, whether it's snowing, raining, whatever, which is quite far away. So sorry to be boring, but just wanted to make sure that we are all on the same page. Now, the other thing is there are other types of cars, pods have been mentioned, which are level 4, where actually you're not at all in control. There's no steering wheel, there's no pedals. These are still called driverless cars. At the moment, they're going at quite low speeds, but it's a very, very different thing, but it's still driverless cars. So when you ask me whether I have a fear about mass adoption of driverless cars, I have to say to you, which driverless car are you talking about? What are you asking me? So, why is there such a hype for driverless cars? I think everyone is wondering. Lots of different reasons are being mentioned, and I'm going to try and give you some of the what I think are the synopsis of why. 3 main reasons from a policymaker's point of view, at least, is urbanization, globalization, and population growth. Okay, so 74% of the European population is now living in the city. 89, nearly 90% in North America. And so the cities are just very, very busy. Globalization, I won't go through. Population growth, we're just not dying as quickly as we used to, so there's just a lot more people around. And cities are getting full. Lots more people living in the city. They can't get from A to B without being stuck in traffic. And that's a problem, and policymakers want to do something about that. We're also dying because of transport. So 40,000 people a year in the UK die because of air pollution, die earlier than they should, and some of that is because of transport. A lot of that is because of the emissions from transport. What are the other reasons? And now I try my buzzword bingo, and thank you for having one of them already mentioned. So 95% of accidents are caused by humans. Takes the human out, then we will be safer. We will have more time to do things if we're in driverless cars because they're going to drive themselves, so we'll have more leisure. We'll be able to work longer, so we'll be more productive, and the country will be richer. We spend around 5 days of the year in traffic, so we'll have that time. There'll be better traffic flow, there'll be lower emissions, and impaired and blind people will be able to drive. Again, thank you for mentioning those in the buzzword bingo. So there's this vision of this driverless car picking you up outside of your house, taking you to the supermarket, going to get the next person without you having to park it, and you might even share the car with some other people. It just does what it's supposed to do, and it's lovely. The city is green now, there's no cars parked. At the moment, 95% of the cars are parked in the road 95% of the time. The city looks ugly. That will all go away, and it will be a lovely place for my kids to run around like I used to. It will be safe. The car won't hit the kids because it will stop in time. It goes at the speed it's supposed to. It's not drunk. What a lovely vision. Unfortunately, this is now where my students call me a party pooper, because then we talk about, well, that's actually, that vision is nice, but we've got a long way to go, and here are where the problems exist. So level 5, that would be great, but between now and then, there are problems. We know that, for example, in level 2 and 3, we need to monitor, we need to be aware, we need to be supervising the vehicle. Well, research from other domains, such as aviation, shows that we're not very good at supervising. We get bored, we get distracted, we fall asleep, we respond later to emergency situations than when we're in control of the car. I can tell you I've found out myself many times in my experiments that I've done in the driving simulator. And we might want to have a little drink because we think the car is going to take us. We might even want to have a nap. And I'm afraid this continues. Thank you. It might be 2 minutes, but yeah. So, other things. I don't know if I'm in control. Is it in control? Is it in control in this part of the road, or is it in control in that part of the road? Is it in partial automation, or is it in conditional automation? Is it in autopilot? What do these actually even mean? How do I manage to get around this sharp curve? Is it going to manage it? Does it know about the roadworks that were just happening this morning? Has it been told about that, or have I got to look out for it knowing that? Has it seen that child that's just about to run in the road? Oh, good, yes, it has seen that child. It stops just before the child gets in front of it. But then it just stops, because it doesn't know how to get round that child at the moment. It can't communicate with the child saying, get out of my way. So I have to get control back from it and communicate with the child and get the child to get out of the way. It's going at 30 miles an hour. That's great. That's what the speed limit is. But it's really annoying everyone else around me who thinks this is actually a 40-mile-an-hour road, really, even though the speed limit says it's 30. And so everyone's getting annoyed, so I'd better turn it off. Right, I have to monitor this thing. This isn't much fun, having to monitor it, so I'd rather just drive it myself. Oh, and I keep forgetting how to use this thing now because I haven't used it for a while. And it's beeping at me and telling me to look over here and touch the steering wheel. Well, that's really annoying. I'm going to turn it off. Oh, and you know what? Everyone's got one of these driverless cars now because it's really cool, so the traffic is still as bad, and it makes no difference to my ability to get from A to B. So do you know what? Actually, tomorrow, I think I'm just going to get the train. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Natasha. Our second speaker from the opposition is Joy Gia. Gia is a first-year law student at Queen's who recently represented the union as an adjudicator at the World University Debating Championship in 2018. Joy, the floor is yours.
Before I start my speech, I'd just like to address some of the things that came up in the last one, right? This idea of the fact that regardless of having driverless cars and the development that we are seeing, that we are still going to be put in a position where we may have to supervise these vehicles. The first thing to say is we think in the inevitable future, you're going to have a situation where these cars are properly developed and where they have learnt sufficient information to be able to drive and be able to be aware of any scenarios that may occur without us having to be in such a superficial role. But even if under the very near future we still have to be in these positions to have to supervise, we think that that is not necessarily a problem. Because to the extent where we get any sort of, we give any autonomous control to these vehicles is a small thing that we no longer have to constantly think about. And if you think that if it's true to say that people aren't very good at supervising, that is just as true as under the status quo, where you have to supervise every single thing that car does because you have to be in control of every single element of it. It means that when you get distracted because you're trying to talk to people in the car, or if you have screaming kids in the back, it means that these sort of situations that create human error that kills millions and millions of people on the roads each year no longer has to happen. We think any form of control you can give to these vehicles is a good one, and that is true for a number of reasons. I'm going to do two main things in this speech. Firstly, I'm going to talk about why mass adoption of driverless cars is the only way that we are able to make full use of their benefits and to be able to see their full benefits. And secondly, regardless of all the benefits to individuals, why this gives us broader social benefits in society. So on this first issue of why mass adoption is the only way to see their full benefits, the first and simplest thing to say here is if each driverless car you put on the road in place of a manual car gives you some level of benefit, then just mathematically, the more driverless cars you have, the greater the benefits, right? It means things like greater convenience because you no longer have to spend hours searching for car parking and just tell your car to park itself, or you can be involved in the sharing economy that is increasingly a part of today's modern society. It means things like more mobility, allowing people who can't drive ordinary cars to now be able to get around. It also means allowing people to go on longer trips, right, without getting tired, having to stop, not knowing what to do with their car once they get to their destination if they're driving from one location to another. It means people have more free time. One, because cars are more efficient, but two, because now you can make use of the time that you have to spend in commute each day. It means all the environmental and economic benefits that my previous speakers talked about. It also means things like reducing traffic congestion, right? Because these driverless cars necessarily are able to communicate with each other and communicate better with the environment around them. This means that they can drive at a constant speed and drive closer to each other than humans feel comfortable being able to do, because it means that they are able to make better judgments and faster than we can, so they can stop and respond to situations better. We think all of these benefits, when you have the more driverless cars you put on the road, then the more likely you're able to see them. But the greatest benefit we think that driverless cars give you is the increased element of safety. I've already told you how many people die because of human error each year, and that is something that has not yet is not disputed at all in this speech, right? The problems that proposition have with safety, we've heard, I think, are also going to be addressed when you have mass adoption of driverless cars. Why is this? Because all the situations and examples you can point to under the status quo where driverless cars have failed and have caused accidents are caused because of some interaction with some human element, right? It means interacting with, a person walking in front of the road or another car stopping and not being able to communicate that. When you have mass adoption of driverless cars and you put all of these vehicles on the road in place of normal cars, it means they can communicate more efficiently with each other. They can communicate more efficiently with the environment around them. It means we're going to have a system that is adapted and suited for driverless cars, and it means that we are able to get rid of the human error that causes more danger than driverless cars ever will. We heard an analogy here to drones and the number of deaths that they have caused, even though they are autonomous and are able to do so without humans being involved, right? I just think that is not a parallel you can draw because of the fundamental different uses that they are. Drones are designed to kill. That means that when they fire, but it also means that when they fire a missile, you have no control over where that necessarily goes. The calculus you make there is one that we don't think exists in the world of driverless cars. So secondly, on how we're able to see greater social benefits in society. We've already heard in today's debate how you get greater economic and environmental benefits when you have more driverless cars. I'm going to add 2 new things here. The first is say that it will massively impact our way of life and the way we engage with transport. We think there is already a generational and cultural change with the way that we look at vehicles and the way that we interact with it and like use transport in our daily lives, right? We think youth of today are less inclined and less wanting to own their own cars and be tied down to one place. They'd rather live in major cities, which we already know aren't exactly that great for owning a car today because of the massive level of congestion and things like that. It means that youth aren't necessarily willing to pay all the high costs that are involved with maintaining a vehicle. We see that gradual shift to a society that prefers using systems like getting taxis, like using an Uber. And we think that necessarily sets us up very well for the sharing economy that driverless cars are preparing us for. So we think like all these experiences that we've heard in today's debate about the thrill of passing your driving test already is gradually ceasing to exist in today's society. So we don't think that that is a problem that driverless cars are going to add. In fact, if anything, we think driverless cars are going to increase the experience that you get from driving for 2 reasons. First of all, it means that you no longer have these things like waiting for ages in congestion, right? Because we think driverless cars are going to be able to make use of roads more efficiently. They can communicate with each other and know which roads to avoid before you see the massive pile of traffic that is in your way. But it also means that more people can now enjoy the experience of driving without having to go through the long process of driving, of like passing and getting your license and things like that. But it also means that people from different social classes who may not currently be able to, say own a car or have the time to be able to put time aside to learn how to drive are now being able to make use of that. Because we think the joy of driving comes from that freedom you get from being able to get yourself from one place to another without relying on others. We think that is exactly what driverless cars allow you to do. The next thing to say here is we think that driverless cars will bring changes to the way our cities are organised and changes for the better. Firstly, it just gives us an opportunity because when we have to restructure certain infrastructure in the city to make way for driverless cars to deal with problems that already exist in city centres, right? So we may no longer need structures like traffic lights. But it also means that when you make better use of the roads that are there, that you have less, that you're able to have more space freed up for other things, because driverless cars necessarily no longer need the same amount of road. We no longer have the same congestion. We think that we give you a better society to live in. Very happy to host.
Thank you, Joy. We now move back to the proposition and to our third speaker, who is Tudor Musat. Tudor is a second-year law student at Trinity Hall and a former union debating officer. He was champion of the Fiat Open 2017 and semi-finalist of the UCLIV BBU Open and the Sofia Open. Tudor, the floor is yours.
Mr. President, I asked the opposition how they would program these cars to deal with incredibly morally complicated, ethically complicated, context-dependent situations. What I got from them is, yeah, we don't really know. We'll see on our way, right? So what we on proposition fear is not really cars. We don't fear cars. We don't fear technology. We don't even fear AI. We fear this type of uncertainty and ignorance and condescension from tech-savvy elites in Silicon Valley that say, oh, we'll know how to deal with them. Don't you worry. Don't you fear them. We fear this specific type of rash decisions about technological decisions that might make or break our future, right? That's specifically what we fear in opposition, and not exactly the intrinsic characteristics of driverless cars, but rather about the process in which we achieve that purposes, right? So in this speech today, one point of clarification of what proposition has to prove to you today in order for us to win. Second, a point of rebuttal regarding what we heard from opposition today. And third of all, three main points about morally difficult decisions, hacking, and then third of all, adaptability to specific context. First, the point of clarification. So just to be clear, on proposition, we don't stand for the abolition of driverless technology, right? Nor do we stand for never implementing it whatsoever, right? We concede it might have some benefits, right? But we tell you that the process of obtaining them safely is dependent on us being cautious. Cautious about the legal developments, cautious about the technological developments, cautious about the ethical developments. Now, this type of caution is dependent, and don't get this wrong, it is dependent on fearing them, right? Because fearing them means you give them the respect they deserve in terms of their possible potential negative consequences, right? Just as the way in which we implemented the internet or social media or CCTV, right? We are right to fear those as well because they do imply negative consequences, right? But that act of fearing them is exactly what enables us to be cautious about them and to not act rashly regarding them, right? So just to be clear regarding this clarification, this debate isn't about the outcome, right? How we end up with developing cars, how will they look on our roads? It's about the process, right? Because that's what fear feeds into. If you fear something, then you approach the process of developing it with greater care. You walk slower towards those technological phases of development. You walk slower towards those ethical decisions and thus try to get the right ones before you throw it out on the market quickly, right? Good. Now, let's go on the first point of rebuttal regarding what we heard from proposition. So what proposition essentially told us, and especially since I asked this question, is, we'll be mindful, we'll take care of these issues. But again, and I reiterate, recognize that you can't be mindful of these issues, you can't be cautious of them unless you recognize and fear their negative potential and their negative consequences, right? Recognize again that fear must be the precursor of caution. Now, what they additionally tell us is, as I said, you will be mindful of them, we'll take care. Well, the genuine risk of that is if you dismiss these perils, if you dismiss these cautions saying, we'll look at them once we get to that point, is you treat them like a side note. You treat them as something which is non-essential, but rather we want to focus on this particular issue. You get to say, like opposition is saying this, we got the memo, we'll take care. Well, the issue of getting the memo but never acting on it is that has happened many times with disastrous consequences, right? I'm sure the Volkswagen CEO got a memo about carbon emissions and noxious gases that its cars produce. He didn't do anything about it. Why? Because the profit incentive to create these cars quicker, to put them on the market quicker, drive his company forward towards pushing out this cautiousness and pushing out this fear and leading them to disastrous consequences, right? If you say, we'll be mindful of them, we got the memo, you're never going to do anything unless you recognize their negative potential, fear them, and then act upon them. Good. Now, first point of constructive, moral dilemmas. And we've already, and the first speakers in this debate on proposition have already told you that these cars pose genuine moral dilemmas and real difficulties, right? We've told you about instances in which these cars will have to take the decision of killing a pedestrian because he's in its way, or killing its passenger by driving off a cliff or driving into a railing, right? We've told you about situations such as two cars being on the edge of a hairpin curve and which are bound to crash into each other. One of them has 5 passengers in it, one of them has 1 passenger, you. Both of them are driverless. What will these cars decide? Will your car smash into the 5-passenger car, killing all the 5 passengers in order to save yourself? Or will it throw itself off the cliff, killing yourself, but saving 5 people? These are obviously really difficult questions about how do you program these cars, right? Because essentially, they're questions about how do you value human life. Opposition, again, says, we'll choose one of them, we don't know. Yeah, but the issues with that is taking out the human factor out of this equation, first, disables these cars from using moral intuitions on the spot, because they can't adapt to one spot, but they have a one-to-go rule continuously. And second of all, you can't hold them accountable, right? I'll take you in a second. You can't hold them accountable. If this car is programmed to take this decision to swerve off the cliff and kill you but save the other 5 people, you can't hold it accountable. Why? Because there was no driver to take that decision, rather a whole nexus of people who engineered this car, which are all of them very, very dilutely responsible. Because essentially what you're, I'll take you in a sec. Because essentially what you're doing is divesting responsibility, right? No longer are you saying this driver had the responsibility. If he did something wrong, we'll punish him for the closure of the victims of that accident. Now, who are you going to punish? The passenger, the producer of the car, maybe the company who produced the AI, or the technicians which programmed the AI? Again, divestment of responsibility. We should fear these issues in order for us to actually reach genuine answers which can be applicable in practice. Please.
You mentioned a case where there's a car that can either drive itself off the cliff or drive into some 5 people and kill them. How do you propose the driver in that car would react? And surely, do you not agree that just by discussing about the moral dilemmas, we're already seeing a benefit? Otherwise, we'll not even be discussing this issue at all. The driver will take a decision. He'd probably choose to save himself, right?
Yeah. All that I'm saying is discussing about one thing and genuinely fearing them is the other. Because if you only discuss about them, right, you'll get in the circumstance in opposition in which we said, oh, we had this discussion in the boardroom, we'll think of a solution at one point down the road because this technological debate is more important, we'll go for this technological development. If you genuinely fear them, you won't implement them and put them on our roads before you solve that ethical dilemma, right? Second point, hacking, and I'll be quick. No, thank you. So we've already seen that there's mass vulnerabilities in the international cyber scene and cybersphere that we see in the world, right? We've seen hacks that have left the NHS in shambles. We've seen hacks which have left one of the greatest democracies in the world, or anyway, up to some previous point, in shambles, such as the US, right? Having been massively hacked by Russia, specifically in its electoral process, right? Clearly, these issues should produce fear. But I'm telling you, this fear should be amplified when these kind of hacks could affect each of us individually. Because when your car and your safety now depends on what the hacker around the world or across the globe can do to your car, then we should genuinely fear that. Not only because you could have hackers that disable your cars because they want to harm you, or disable your brakes, or disable your engines when you most need them, but because you could have all kinds of hacker groups which demand ransom from these companies in order to give them back their fleet of cars, or because you have terrorist organizations that would be able to put a city at a standstill just by hacking into 10,000 cars and plunging that city into chaos. And lastly, Tom, I'll be quick. Third of all, so obviously this hacking issue poses massive fears, should pose fears in order for us to solve them. Third of all, adaptability to conditions. My colleagues on proposition have already talked about this, right? These computers, these driverless cars aren't ready yet, right? They're still dependent on precise maps. They're still dependent on clear and perfect roads. Nothing within the weather systems that we've seen nowadays provides perfect or clean roads, right? We're still dependent, and we should still be dependent on hand signals between drivers, on eye signals, especially in the circumstance in which not all of your cities will be full of these driverless cars at the same time, but rather you'll have lots of drivers which still drive their cars alongside these cars. So, ending off. In conclusion, you might call proposition today technological conservatives, and you might say that we slow the rate of progress, right? But remember that this modern age has been characterized by adopting madly and super rashly all kinds of technologies that have really harmed our futures, right? We've adapted the internet without thinking about the possibilities of you becoming bankrupt because of hacks in your account. We've adopted the internet without becoming wary of how it could become a hub for underage pornography. We've adopted social media without thinking about its addictive behaviors and how it promotes the destruction of truth and fake news. Now, given all of those, we do believe in the potential of driverless cars. But let's not make the same mistakes as we've done with so many other technologies, but rather treat them as warranting fear and thus creating caution in our development. Thank you.
Thank you, Tudor. And straight to the other side, we now introduce Dr. Gero Kempf, who is the Chief Engineer at Jaguar Land Rover and an Industrial Professor at the Warwick Manufacturing Group, part of the University of Warwick. Gero, the floor is yours.
President. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very honored to speak to you in this debate. Just want to share my most recent observation. Previous speaker talked about, that I didn't hear that we should abolish emails to save postmen's work, or there was a bit of conservative approach to change, I think. Interestingly, previous speaker used a pen and paper to write his speech, but he used his phone and used it as a stopwatch. And I think 10 years ago, phones didn't do that. And we adopted that. We adopted to use something that we call a phone, to use it as a watch. And as we are opposing this fear of mass adoption of driverless cars, or the use of cars to use driverless, to be more specific, I think we shouldn't be naive about the speed of change that we are able to embrace. A car in 10 years' time will be something completely different. And talking to you, I know exactly what you talk about, the fear of being in a situation, being relaxed in a car, and being asked to take over control. And you don't know what to do with the steering wheel anymore. Yeah? My son has seen my home phone in Germany recently. It has a dial. He asked, what is that? I share some of this nostalgia around, olden technology. I bought my first British typewriter in a charity shop for £10 because I just loved it. Brought it home, and his son, he's here today somewhere. He's seen it and he touched the keys. And I said, it's not doing anything. I said, you need to hit it. I'm saying that these problems will be solved in a completely different metaphorical way. Yeah? The same way we look at today's steering wheel and brake pedal and these traditional elements of a fascinating car, and I really know what we talk about. If you come to fascinating cars, I own some of them. It doesn't say that in the future we use the same metaphors in the same way as we use the steering wheel, etc. today. So, fear of technology. Apparently that's number 84 in the world's top 100 greatest phobias. At 84, it sits firmly between the fear of the future and the fear of loud noises. However, it is irrational to ignore actual costs, to your point. It's all driven by economy these days, Fail address real and present dangers and divide our gaze into potential risks, many of which might be phantoms, as I pointed out. Today, we accept in the UK alone per year 73,000 deaths from automotive incidents, and that's just deaths, is not counting the injuries. It's 1.25 million globally. Today, we accept the environmental and polluting costs of waste and overlong journeys. We accept congestion in cities and gridlock on motorways. We accept that some of us will not be able to travel where they wish and how they wish. These are not fears, these are real costs to everyone and to society. This is what we pay with our taxes. And these costs will not remain fixed at the current price. As Francis Bacon said, surely every medicine is an innovation, and he that will not apply new remedies must expect new evils. We live in a world in which more and more of us wish to travel, to do business, and if we do not reduce the current cost of travel, they will worsen and multiply far beyond the current cost. Without change, more will die, more will suffer from pollution, many will be cut off from the world around them. So we must weigh both the cost of innovation and inaction equally. Balance the potential benefits of innovation with a sensible, open assessment of the risks. Where such fears are rational, we must test, mitigate, and regulate our own adoption of innovation. Careful caution is valid. unthinking rejection of change is not. I hope to show over the next few minutes that at least when it comes to autonomous vehicles, the potential of benefits are so great, the risks are so manageable, and the cost of inaction so clear that to reject that possibility of a better, safer, greener way to travel is merely unreasoning paralysis. Why should you care? Why, with any new technology, we cannot truly predict all of the benefits to the customer. This is due to the unpredictable way in which it may alter social behavior, as I pointed out in the little phone and watch example. Would camera phones have predicted the selfie? The only thing we can be certain of is that self-driving cars will automate frequent, tedious, tiresome tasks, and in doing so, both offers users time and prevent common, frequent, known dangers of humans having to all too often attempt the sort of tedious, monotonous perfection at repeatedly performing mundane tasks our very humanity makes us unsuited to, my most British phrase in this talk. What does this mean in practice? Let's talk about accidents and deaths. Self-driving is fundamentally motivated by safety. The most common way fear of driverless cars is articulated in this dilemma we call the trolley problem. Will the car hit one person or save three? There is, on the other side, no ethics requirement from a human driving test today. So are we obligated to tackle these dilemmas only in self-driving cars? If we do, are we making a concerted decision which otherwise would have been left to instinct? Machine learning, neural networks, and offline learning all include human input. In doing so, it opens up the risk of reflecting an individual's view on morality. Machines are a product of their coders. Amazon's Alexa, maybe you have heard this debate, is accused to be apparently a left-wing feminist or something like that. Without change, more will die, more will suffer from pollution, many will be cut off from the world around them. So we must, as I said, balance all this out. Just because I reacted to all these wonderful contributions to the discussion, I'm just skipping a little bit ahead. I want to point out that I think to make a more sensible debate, we should focus ourselves on the level 4 high automation, where the driver is able, with a new paradigm, to interact with the machine. Yeah? We have to recognize the human-machine relationship and the need for coexistence with machines. We talked about pollution, we talked about congestion, we talked about time and community a little bit, but we shouldn't forget that automated cars will also democratize mobility. The elderly and disabled could be afforded the same freedoms granted to vehicle owners today. And social isolation amongst the elderly is thought to increase mortality by 26%. Another good example is if you consider people who are just not up to driving their cars themselves anymore, but they are in a social context, let's say in a family. Grandma can take care of the grandchildren without asking the parents to fetch them. Yeah? This is a vast improvement that can open a whole new role in a later stage of life of elderly people for the benefit of society. Yeah? So combating social isolation can, through that way, significantly reduce strain on public services and dependent relatives as well. There are reasonable concerns. We fear things we depend on, but we don't seemingly have control over. So the previous speaker, I think, pointed that out quite a bit. Self-driving cars, for example, I predicted generate data equivalent to 1 million iPhone pictures per hour. Yeah? So it is sensible to ask what happens to this data. Who owns it? How vulnerable does it make it? Makes it to hacking. These questions are not fully answered. You're completely right. But it's fair to say that this is a fundamental problem that needs to be solved better, not only for automated driving. It's been tackled as well in all new digital transaction models like cryptocurrencies or in the way individual search algorithms are being protected. Yeah? To make it very clear, automated driving systems do not need to build on individual personal data. However, standardization of testing and validation will require government guidance in the same way the automotive industry is legislated today. It might require a more careful and secure guidance, just as the government, not car makers, set the highway code. Government, not car makers, must regulate the self-driving highway code. And just as a tagline, the future highway code needs to control the code in the car. Yeah? So the conclusion, my conclusion is, we have to manage change. We shouldn't halt it. Yeah? We're in the midst of a mobility revolution poised to bring more change in the next decade than we've seen in the past 50 years. It's not only the rise of self-driving modes exciting, it is inevitable. Yeah? And as an automaker, we have the responsibility not to fear driverless cars. Instead, we must use our expertise to shape the boundaries in which they function so we can deliver the many possible benefits to individuals and to society. Fear of autonomy is undeniable. But let's not discount this fear. It's a useful stimulus that pushes us to explore every aspect, facet, and detail. Let's not deny technology either. Society has always adjusted to such transformations. History tells us so over and over again. New technology always brings new questions and threats. Yet, and the debate we're having is too accusatory. 70,000 lives per year in the UK alone. Does that make for a debate? Don't fear the mass adoption of driverless cars, please. Address frankly the questions that need to be answered along the way. Let them fuel the debate so that we can answer them in the most innovative way possible so that we will realize a socially responsible and safer future. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. We'll go to our last round of floor speeches. If anybody would like to speak in proposition, yes, just here.
In 2009, a plane took off from Rio de Janeiro towards, I assume, Paris, but I'm not entirely sure. It was Air France flight. I just realized I'm talking the wrong. I want to talk opposition. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Sorry.
I'll come back to you. Thank you.
I got over-anxious. I apologize.
Fine. Would anyone like to speak in proposition? Yes, of course. Just wait for a microphone, please. And if you wouldn't mind saying your name and college as well for the book. Thank you. That's all right. Next time.
It's Anandita Ketkar, Homerton College. So the opposition have made excellent points about how driverless cars would be the solution to the problems that we should be so fixated on. With 2.2 billion people without access to adequate water and sanitation, and 1.1 billion people living under the World Bank-defined poverty line of $1.95 at purchasing power parity, I would like to ask the question of whether driverless cars are actually a part of the solution to the problems that we should be fixated on, or are a part of the problems themselves. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm hoping for at least one. Would anyone like to speak in opposition of the motion? Yeah, you go.
Starting over. Pedro Nash, Hughes Hall. As I was saying, 2009 Air France flight 447 took off from Rio de Janeiro towards, I believe, Paris. Halfway through the flight, over the Atlantic Ocean, the pitot tube, which is a piece of equipment which measures the aircraft's velocity, froze over. Therefore, the aircraft's autopilot could not tell how fast the aircraft was going. Therefore, the autopilot shut down along with the aircraft's fly-by-wire system. Due to this, the series of alerts lit up the cockpit. However, the pilots had never seen these errors. They didn't understand what was going on. As was mentioned by proposition, the pilots, they did not know how to react because it had been so long since they'd had a problem. Indeed, nowadays, a significant amount of accidents that occur in air travel occur due to malfunctions in problems that orbit around, shall we say, an aircraft's autopilot. But why is that? It's because autopilot has basically eliminated every single other aspect of aircraft accidents, which are, as has been mentioned previously, massively due to human error. So yes, those people, including some friends of mine who were on that flight, they died due to, you can argue how significant it was, but to some extent at least, due to autopilot. And indeed, autonomous vehicles, autonomous cars or buses or trucks, what have you, they have already killed, as was mentioned by Proposition, and they will kill. They will kill lots of people. Let there be no argument about that. I don't think anyone is disagreeing with that. However, they will save many, many more. To such an extent that I actually believe that, I'm in the Cambridge Union, I love a good debate, but I actually find that the ethical debate regarding autonomous vehicles to be almost irrelevant, a curiosity. Because, sure, how many times do you have two vehicles about to have an impact on a curve off a cliff? That almost never happens. I think we can all agree. It never happened to me, at the very least, thankfully. So yes, perhaps autonomous vehicles will be programmed in such a way that they will kill 5 people instead of 1, or to save 1 person instead of 5, and there will be no ethical argument regarding what is the proper thing to do, which is an open question ethically even nowadays, after hundreds of years of such a discussion. But honestly, that ethical dilemma is going to be something that's going to happen like once a year, worldwide. And instead, we're going to save thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. So the ethical dilemma, it's fun. I'll have that argument with you. It's fun, it's entertaining. But it's almost irrelevant. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, would anybody like to speak in abstention of the motion? Yes. Sorry. Can you give your name as well, please?
Luke Hallam, Trinity College. I would just ask, does anyone here own Google Glass? I thought not. Do you? That's great, because that was the future once, and it was going to be sort of massively adopted by everyone, and we were going to have screens in front of our eyes, and we could do everything by blinking and that sort of thing, and only 1 or 2 people in this room either have or want them. The same would be, I doubt anyone under the age of 30 has ever flown on a supersonic jet, whereas if you'd asked someone in the 1980s what the future of aviation was going to be, we'd all be zooming around the world between here and America in a matter of an hour or 2. So I think with these things, you can never tell, and it's possibly far too early to work out what the consequences will be. Just to draw issue with something made by the Proposition, the hacking thing, I think the NHS was hacked because he used Windows XP. That's not a problem that's going to happen with driverless cars. The election was hacked for political reasons, not in order to kill people. So I think there's pros and cons to every argument. Equally, I think that we've worked out that all of these accidents happen because of human error. And so to mitigate against that, we would have to transition between human-driven cars and fully automated cars, like in a matter of weeks. So it can go one of 2 ways, and we just can't see how it's happened. So I think in life, possibly one of the best things to do is to let things happen and retroactively decide on the pros and cons, because there was simply, with technology, no way we can ever know how it's ever going to go. Thank you.
Thank you. We now turn to our final set of speakers. Starting for the Proposition, we have Dr. Andy Palmer. Andy Palmer is the CEO of Aston Martin and a chartered engineer by training. He was previously the Chief Operating Officer at Nissan. Andy, the floor is yours.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to speak before you. I'm not a Luddite. I may look like a Luddite, but believe me, I'm not a Luddite. The authority in which I speak to you today is, as being voted in 2013 by Auto Express, the most senior British person in the auto industry. In 2007, I developed the Nissan Leaf, the first of its kind in the current electric cars. And in 2014, one of my last jobs at Nissan was to announce autonomous cars. Autonomous cars are as inevitable as death and tax. They're coming, whether we like it or not. But we should fear them. We should fear them for one reason. The way in which my industry, the industry in which I've worked for nearly 40 years, is introducing this technology in an utterly reckless manner.
On that point.
I've really just started, but I promise I'll get back to you. It took me a long time to work out how to get to that point. So I speak against my colleagues in many cases, but I'm pragmatic enough to acknowledge that autonomous vehicles will come, and we should welcome autonomous vehicles, but we should welcome autonomous vehicles when developed in the right way under the correct circumstances. 4 arguments. First argument relates to the development of autonomous technology in the UK. We'll listen to our governments telling us how we're going to be a leadership in zero emissions, batteries, and autonomous vehicle development. I don't know whether I'm allowed to swear in this forum, but it's complete bollocks. We will not lead in this technology. We barely contribute to the future science of automotive vehicles. This technology will be developed in Silicon Valley. Waymo is probably 3 or 4 years ahead of any of us. And it will be those startups of the Waymos and the Apples of the world that will lead the introduction of this technology. So it won't be us that's leading this technology. It won't be our intellect. There won't be new jobs as a result of this technology. We will be followers. Now, why do I say that? Why is that interesting? Well, it's interesting because the people developing the new technology don't have the 120 years of experience of designing cars. They see cars as a little bit of an inconvenience in which to implant their software technology. But that's where we should fear it. Because as automotive engineers, we all know that we can't develop a perfect car first time. The way in which we develop cars normally is through an evolutionary cycle. We go from level 0 to level 1, to level 1 to level 2, to level 3, to level 4, to level 5. I will argue that that transitional step, particularly level 2 and 3, is not safe. Because level 2 and 3 requires the interaction between the man and the machine. Now, Tesla famously beta test their customers. Sometimes they beta test their customers to death. It's true that a Tesla S on autopilot couldn't recognize the difference between a bridge and an Arctic trailer. It saw a trailer, it was white-sided, it looked like a bridge that it could go under, and rather than stop, it accelerated. It killed the occupant. Now, my mother, who's 80 years old, is neither artificial or intelligent. But I guarantee you she can tell the difference between a bridge and a trailer. Level 2 and level 3 absolutely requires the driver to be able to take over when the machine gets confused. Now, today, it takes even my mother around 1 second. Okay, it's my mother, 2 seconds. 3 seconds if she's had a sherry. To take over a situation and react to a situation. If one measures, and the NHTSA did measure, how long it takes for a driver to take control of a car which had previously been driven by the robot, and it was 17 seconds. So 16 seconds longer than the human by themselves. Do the maths. That, if you were traveling at 62 kilometers per hour, that's 250 meters traveled before the car reacts. That's an awful lot of risk. So my argument is not that we shouldn't accept autonomous control. It's that we shouldn't accept the transition, as the industry would like it, through levels 2 and 3. If we're going to adopt this technology, we should view it in the same way as humanity looked at the adoption from horse to car. It was a very fast transition, a completely different transition. We have to go, as an industry, from level 1 to level 4. And we have to skip the stuff in between. That's the only safe way of introducing this technology. There's a lady here. Now I'm ready. Go ahead.
You've raised something else with that last point, and I absolutely agree. Skipping out the middle stages probably would make driverless cars more efficient and reduce the safety problems straight away. Why is that an argument that we should fear them? Isn't that an argument that we should be increasing investment in driverless cars, promoting them, so we can get to that stage faster, so we can make that leap?
All I'm saying is that we shouldn't go through levels 2 and level 3. We shouldn't rely on that interaction between man and machine. In the moment, we're in a race to the bottom. Apple and Google fear the car makers. The car makers fear Apple and Google. In consequence, we're all racing to the final destination. We're all claiming that our cars will be ready for level 4 and level 5, without, in fact, having done sufficient research and validation of the systems. Some of those validations include, for example, cybersecurity. Our industry, my industry, is very, very weak when it comes to cybersecurity. Yet we know that in the UK alone, 65% of large firms are hacked every year. We know for a fact that cars have over 100 million lines of software. They're easily hacked, they're exposed, and we have to think about how we properly protect them. Guess what? On a car today, what part of the car is most likely to break down? It's the electrical system. If we can't solve basic wire and fuses, what makes us think that within a matter of 2 years that we can solve 100 million lines of software? We can't. We can't. So in conclusion, I accept as an inevitability that autonomous cars will come. And they must come. We've heard statistics today of between 92 and 94% of all accidents are caused by humans. It's correct. And ultimately, we can make a difference. We can save many wasted lives by adoption of this technology. But what we shouldn't do is that we shouldn't kill more people in the transition to that technology. We shouldn't be relentlessly and recklessly pursuing this technology because we fear Apple or Apple fears VW. That's not the way to approach this problem. We must avoid the race to the bottom. We must eliminate the transitionary period. And as automakers and legislators, we have to work together to allow us to move directly to level 4. Finally, of course, I work for a car company called Aston Martin. Aston Martin make beautiful driver's car, and I hope that within the world of autonomous technology that there'll still be room for you, as the new generation, to experience the joys of driving. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Andy. We will now close this debate with Shane Spector. Spector is a preeminent American trial lawyer, professor, and founding partner of Klein & Spector, one of the US's largest law firms, which concentrates on the representation of catastrophically injured people. Shane, the floor is yours, and thank you.
May it please the House, Mr. President, it's a great honor to be here again. It's a monumental feeling to know that I am all that is standing between you and the bar. And I have this feeling that perhaps everything has been said that can be said about this subject, or nearly everything, but not everyone has said it. So, with your indulgence, I would just like to try to say a few things about this subject, perhaps that have not been said, or cast them in a little different light. Because as I have heard the speakers in favor, I feel a kinship with them on so much of what they've said. 3 of them have said that 92, 94, 95% of all motor vehicle accidents are caused by driver error. We agree. My colleague from Jaguar told us that there are 73,000 Britons killed per year on the highways. We agree. In fact, there are 1.4 million people killed per year on the highways. There are tens of millions who are injured. If 95% of those are caused by human error, that is a public health emergency that requires us to address it immediately and vigorously. And I say to my most eloquent colleague from Aston Martin that when he says that the part of the vehicle that breaks down the most often is the electrical system, I say to him, no, sir. The part that breaks down most often is the driver. It's the drug driver. It's the driver on drugs. It's the driver, perhaps some of our mothers should not be driving. Sherry or no sherry? And that's my point. And that's my point. Autonomous cars, that they bring the hope of a safer world. Not a guarantee. Yes, there could be hacking. I know that. There could be a lot of things. There could be people coming down from Mars tonight. But let's deal in the world that we're facing today. And I hear you on the poverty facing the world. And I think there'll be a debate on that next week. But tonight we're talking about autonomous cars. And we're talking about the mayhem on the highways and the risk to all of us. And it's not just people who are driving. You're going to cross the street tonight, and you know that you take your life in your hands in Cambridge every day, crossing the street with the drivers in Cambridge and not just the bicyclists, right? What we need autonomous bicycles. No. So, I say also to the House, let us consider for a moment something that's not been dealt with at all. And that is the promise of a new passenger economy. I mean, think of this. We can, with driverless cars, we can drink legally in our cars. We can dine in our cars. We can get, I love your toes, a mani-pedi in our cars. We can get health care. We can be educated. We can do our jobs. One might even suppose that the world's oldest profession may find a new home in the driverless car. Think of the possibilities. speaking as a trial lawyer and a law professor, may I also say to you that, and this I mean seriously, this one little bit, okay, this one little bit, I mean seriously. Right now in the world, nearly no one is adequately insured or has adequate assets to deal with a catastrophic motor vehicle accident. But to the extent that with a driverless car, the fault lays with the motor vehicle manufacturer, be it Mr. Jaguar or Mr. Aston Martin. And by the way, sir, if I owned an Aston Martin, I would have no interest in it being driverless. None. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. But most of us can't afford Aston Martins, sir. Mm-hmm. Well, I rely upon my eloquent colleague on the economic analysis. I'm just dealing here with frivolity at the late hour that we have. So I just would like to add, if I may, that we could all be wrong. These could be terrible. They really could be, although they could be great, as you say. And I think that we agree that, yes, they're coming, they could be bad, they could be good. But let us have the freedom to experiment and see. If they're terrible, what will happen? The marketplace will speak. Regulatory authorities will speak. Let us have the freedom to be wrong. Don't take away our freedom to be wrong. What's more likely is that the history of the human experience is that every technological advance from the printing press to the internet has made us more efficient and happier. Okay, there's no longer much need for a scroll writer or for a carriage driver of a horse. But so what? You know, when automatic teller machines were invented, people said, oh, tellers will lose their jobs. But what ended up happening was that banks opened more branches and more people were employed. History tells us that what happens is that work adapts to technology. The scroll writer of the 13th century has been replaced today by, you know, the brilliance of using the iPhone for nearly everything. All that should be feared from autonomous cars is fear itself. All that should be feared is the absence of bold and persistent experimentation with the human experience. We had the courage to go from the cave to the hut, and from the hut to the dormitory, and from the dormitory to a home. From the Stone Age to the Iron Age, to the Steel Age, to the Information Age, from the megaphone to the microphone, from voodoo and witchcraft to advanced life-saving medical technology. Let's allow, if they want them, let's allow people to have driverless cars. Let's allow people the freedom, if they want to get into driverless cars with the hope and the promise, but not the guarantee, of a safer, more productive, more fun, and a more glorious world. I thank you very much, Mr. President.
Shannon, thank you very much for closing the debate. As many of you will know, the way that we vote here is now not by noise, but by walking. If you would like to vote in favor of this motion and side with the proposition, you walk through the door marked ayes on the right. If you would like to vote in opposition, you walk through the door marked noes. But just before that, I want to remind you that tomorrow at 3 p.m. we have the star of Breaking Bad, Bryan Cranston, who will be here, which will definitely be very exciting. Our next week's debate is on whether celebrity fandom is a religion, with Katie Price versus Reverend Richard Coles and many others. And just a reminder that in the bar afterwards, in light of this very interesting topic, we'll be having a Mario Kart tournament on the Nintendo Wii. If you would like to do that, please do. Also, if you spoke in this debate, please feel free to come and get a free drink from the dining room with us and the speakers afterwards. Thank you very much and have a great evening.